Can you please speak into the mic?
We are live with Marko Radosevic. I was going to say Radicevic. Marko Radicevic and Fernando Cipriano, right? Yeah. And Fernando, let's just get one thing straight. I'm the funny person here. Mm-hmm. Marko is not as funny as me. I was telling somebody here, Ruben, who you don't know.
I don't.
Ruben came up to me one day and he's like, "Hey, your friend Marko, he's really funny."
Wow.
And I was like, "Dude, I am the funniest guy you know. Never tell me that." Right. And he was just convinced. So Marko, there you go. People think you're funny, man.
You know what's one of the worst things is if someone tells you you're not very funny. It is. It's like, even if you've tried to, if you're in a room and you make a joke, people don't have to laugh.
Right.
But if someone walks up to you and says, you're not very funny, you've offended the shit out of that person.
What do you make of Tom telling someone, I am the funniest person you know? What do you make of people that...
They're usually nowhere near as funny as they think they are.
Okay.
Right? But whatever. I'm not putting you in that category.
So you think we'll
leave it up to the audience to determine where
I'm sure everyone listening realizes how funny I am, but you might be, maybe you're a little funnier than me. Maybe half a point. If I'm 8 out of 10, maybe you're 8.25, something like that.
Right. Maybe substantially more.
Maybe. So we were just talking about social media and how it's like basically ruining society. I'm just curious because I was going to talk to you about some economic stuff because I wanted to get your take on some of the latest data. But where do you think we're headed? Like if everybody's just online screaming at each other, is that where you're coming from? That we're all online, all on social media. Everybody has a point of view. Everybody screams. You label people that don't agree with you. So there's no even debate. It's just like, oh, you're left, you're right, you're this, you're that. Is that what social media is doing to us? What is it about social media that's like changing the fabric of our communication in society?
The reason I brought it up was I'm not on a lot of social media. I'm not on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, but I am on Twitter. And this was just an observation I made last week. It's not earth-shattering. Everyone knows this. But there is a gentleman that's on CNBC. His name is Dan Ives, and he wears really bold colors all the time. And the Wall Street Journal wrote an article calling him, I don't know, the best dressed or the most interesting dressed man on Wall Street. And he was pretty proud of this. So he reposted it on his Twitter account. And I like going down and seeing what the comments are that people make.
Comment sections are the best.
Right? So he posts this thing and he's very proud of this. And I started reading the comments and it was so jarring to me that I had to call my wife and I said, Di, come and take a look at this. Every single comment, there was not one single positive comment. Like, good for you. Congratulations on the article. Every single one got worse and worse and worse.
So is that by design? Like, is Twitter just feeding those comments to trigger you? Like, Fernando, is that, maybe there are positive comments, but does Twitter know that the comments that are going to trigger Fernando should be loaded at the top?
I don't think so.
I think I saw something recently where people were reading the same post and they saw different comments in different order.
I hope not, but I'll just say that, and I'll sort of open-end this and say, what do you guys think of this? What do you make of the fact that people just had to comment judging him, commenting negatively, mocking him? What is that? What do you say of that? To me, I can only assume that it's much easier. You would never say that to his face. I doubt any of these people would go up to him and say, I saw the article, I think you're a joke. What gives people such courage, right? It's the anonymity, obviously, because otherwise, if your name was posted with your phone number or your address, you'd never say those things. You wouldn't do it on Facebook because people know you. So on Twitter, you're anonymous. What does that say about our society? Is it like this dark fantasy that we get to say things that we're thinking, but we never get to say in public? Is that really... I worry that that's what social media has become. It's a place where we could show our darkest sides.
But we've always had this dark side. It's not like humanity's changed.
Maybe you're right.
I would think that like if somebody was standing on a soapbox 200 years ago in some town square, something yelling what they believed in, that somebody a few rows deep in the audience is going to yell back at that person.
That's just it. I think everyone in the crowd probably has those thoughts, but no one's voicing them. Because we live in a civilized society where you can't mock people constantly. What I'm saying is the old cartoons where you had like a devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other, right? The devil has always been there, right? Social media has allowed us to voice it for the first time with no fear of like, you know, societal repercussions of saying that's just not civilized.
Well, now you can say something and get away with it. Right? I think it's a tremendously interesting psychological experiment. You know, why do people not steal? Probably mostly because they're worried they'll get caught. Right. And maybe some people think I'm an asshole because I said that you shouldn't do it because it's wrong. And I agree with that. But how much do we do because of anonymity? And I think that people have always had this inside of them. Some people say it because they think it's funny. Some people are truly angry and are just trying to hurt other people. I mean, you have to realize, I would think that, you know, whether you hear a lot of these famous social media people, YouTubers and whatnot, they say they never read the comment section. So if Joe Rogan's saying something on YouTube, me saying you're an idiot, he's never going to see that. So I'm not getting at him. So who do I think I'm getting at? A lot of these people can't wait to just get into it on social media, back and forth, comments, you're stupid, you're dumb, you're ugly. And, you know, I've gotten into those things I use Reddit more than anything. And I don't comment at all anymore because you sit there and you're like, I'm arguing with a 12-year-old in Azerbaijan right now. Like, well, what's the point of this? And when you're done, you haven't changed anybody's mind. You haven't moved
You don't
anybody.
feel good.
No, you feel worse. So just don't go on the comment section.
And so what I'm challenging you guys to think is, what if that social vehicle didn't exist? Because 20 years ago, it didn't. What was happening 20 years ago? When a guy like Joe Rogan, let's say, had a television show instead of a podcast.
Yeah, it would be letters to the editor. Somebody would write an opinion piece and someone would respond
and
with a letter.
A lot of time.
And took a lot of time.
Did you ever send a letter to an editor in your life?
No, I don't
mean, so. I guarantee
Maybe
I never did.
Mississauga News one time.
Right. So you're making a great point. So what is the characteristic of the person that writes the letter to the editor?
Yeah.
What is the characteristic of the person that is a heckler at a comedy show? Because those are the exceptions, not the rules. The heckler is individual. The crowd generally, it's not a crowd full of hecklers. We've become a society of hecklers. And so my question is, what was the characteristic of that individual before that would have to really go out of his or her way to write a letter, to heckle? And now it's so easy.
Do we have more hecklers because of the state of Western society? Like, do we have just a percentage? If there was, like, in the 1950s, do you think we had the same amount of people that would heckle as we do today? Media aside,
I think
think it's the same.
Yeah, I mean, you know, in the 1950s was the Red Scare, right? So, you know, I would imagine if anybody did anything that people thought was communist, they hated that person vehemently. Me and you talk about this all the time. I think it's always a point in time. You always think today's worse, and in a way it is, but relatively speaking, it's no different than it was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to say
universal things. We're not talking.
I'm not trying to say, like, you know, the price of a steak is cheaper today. It's not, but you know.
But Marko, there was no vehicle back then.
Right.
You'd have to really go out of your way. To express your opinion if it was negative. We talked about this before, but when I was in high school, if you were ever bullied, it ended on Friday because you went home.
Right. Or you had a fight and it was over.
But yeah, you're right. But if someone just mocked you all week at school, when you went home at the end of the day, it was over.
Yeah, now it's probably worse.
Today, it's constant.
Okay, so then where does this take us? Like, are we just in a constant state of arguing?
We're going to have to learn to adapt, I think. I don't know what the next step is, but I fully agree with Fernando. Social media is horrible. I think it's done terrible things probably to all three of us. And the three of us are probably doing pretty okay with it. And then there are people that I think it's ruining their lives. I think these algorithms are destroying people. I've seen people who I at one point thought were fairly well-balanced individuals, happy. And when I see them, they're just angry all the time now. And yeah, you can go back and say, you know, did COVID, does the money system, all these things. But if you read about it all day and then your algorithm feeds it to you all day long, I mean, before you would, you know, you drive to work, you would listen to whatever was on the radio.
Talk radio.
Now I could listen to 10 podcasts in a row about what I hate. And, you know, you look at the algorithms are based on strong emotions. Strong emotions are not love and things. The strongest emotion that they can elicit out of you is anger and hate, right? That releases the most endorphins. That's what addicts you to everything. Not everything, but whatever, you know, to these podcasts. And I'm very conscious of it. And it's why I do my best to try to look at both sides of the story. Never when I'm
I feel like you guys are both very good at that.
I try because I don't want to, this whole notion of which team you're on, left or right, and then you talk to somebody who you didn't know what they were, and now they recite all 10 points on either the team 1 or team 2. And it's like, how do you agree with all 10 of those points? You don't stray from your team on anything. And that's because they're getting indoctrinated, is a well-used term these days, but you're really being pumped these days.
Yeah.
If it's Twitter, if it's YouTube, it's all these different things. Like if you go to a library, you can't just say, I want all left-wing books or I want all right-wing books. But I look at my YouTube feed and it's just constantly trying to pump me in one direction.
I get, you're bang on. And I'll tell you something. I even the most innocent examples of this. I went to the cottage and my daughter's Netflix account was on the TV. And it's so amazing that I typed in her name, or I pressed her name, and the options came up. And I could not for the life of me find something that was interesting.
Yeah. Totally.
Right? And I thought to myself, wait a second, what are all those things that Netflix tells me is trending? Because those things I like, but what they're telling me is what's trending for people like me that like what I like.
Totally. Isn't that shocking when that happens to you?
I was lost because I said, I've got my list of things I want to watch, and I don't remember them, but I thought I was easily stumble across them because they're trending. And I'm like, not for her, they're not. And so even in the most innocent example of an algorithm, it shows you how you can be convinced of a world that is dramatically different from someone else's world. This happened to me
the other day. We started a new YouTube channel for this podcast, actually. And I guess somebody on our team was logged into that new channel. So then when I went home with my they were logged in on my laptop for something to get permissions or whatever. I went home with the laptop and I opened up YouTube. And it was just like your Netflix example. Right. I'm like, well, where are all these like UFC embedded or, all these things that are coming up that normally kind of pop up that I'll watch.
Right.
And I just thought, I literally thought, YouTube's off today.
Right.
And then it hit me. I'm like, oh my God, I'm not in my own account.
Exactly.
And it was presenting stuff to me that I had never seen before.
So do you see how you could easily be convinced that,
yes.
How did you not see that?
Yeah.
Like, think about that for a moment. Like, I'll say to my brother, oh, did you see that thing on...
it's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
Yeah.
And he's like, I haven't even seen it. I'm like, I don't get it. How did you not see it? So you can be convinced
stuff to Marko like that all the time.
Right.
Hey, have you seen this?
Everyone's looking at it, right?
Totally.
What you mean is everyone in my tribe is looking at it.
Right.
And
that's also dangerous because I think you could have different tribes.
Yes.
Like sometimes people will hear me and I'm sure they're going to think, oh my gosh, this guy's right wing on everything. And then I think about that. I'm like, I don't know. There's some things I think about that I don't think you can just label as being on the right. Maybe it's...
Yeah, it depends on your definitions, I suppose, right?
Yeah, but
you're right.
It's just when you just label people in the middle of an argument, and I think that's what social media does. Somebody will hear Fernando speak and just label him a certain way, and then they judge everything that he says next based on that label, no?
Yeah, I know, just whatever. I'm laughing because we've had this discussion/argument for years, 7-8 years, and it's I don't know. It's hard to kind of talk about this halfway through because without getting into detail, we were having a conversation before we went live, and we fully recognized there's things that the three of us don't want to have as a public discourse. That bothers me. That saddens me that there are things that I don't really feel even that strongly about. I'd love to talk to you guys about it, but because of social media, the way it's going to get pulled apart, the way a 10-second clip will get pulled out of something, and it may label one of the three of us, which can adversely affect our families, our social lives, and our businesses, right? And that's a really, really scary thought. And I'll say this, like the business that I'm in, IT staffing, least sexy industry in the entire world, I love that we have no social media presence. We don't have a YouTube channel. I have almost no exposure to social media, and I love that. I love that because I deal in a very boring business. We're dealing with banks, insurance companies.
It's becoming more rare.
Right, but they want to deal with boring companies. They don't want any controversy, right? So mostly through laziness, but we don't take a social stand on anything because I can't afford for it to go sideways on me, right? And then I can't afford to sit there and say, okay, on this cause, we're going to pick, on these 4, we're not. Like, our business is down 40% from last year. I'm trying to keep people employed. I'm trying to keep my business running.
Yeah, you have real priorities of the business.
I don't have time for some of this
distractions.
Other stuff. And I will deal with that other stuff in my social life, and I'll take a stand on stuff with people that I know, but I'm not going to jeopardize my business, my employees, my partner, all of those different things because I want to take a stand on social issue A. Or it might even be not take a stand. We're just going to, I don't know, like just touch on it, right? Because you feel social pressure that you have to touch on this, right? It kind of brings me back to like, sometimes I had a coffee today, so Tom knows I'm going to be, I don't drink coffee.
Yeah. He had half a coffee.
Wow. I don't drink coffee and I had a coffee today, so I'm like bouncing around a little bit. And now I forget what I was going to say.
But do you think the fact that you have to be scared of what you say, is that just because we have too much like centralization of control over like the media? Like what would you be scared of? Just these companies are all scared to have to deal with anything. So you have to be careful what you say because they don't want to deal with it. And you can kind of be blocked out of doing business. It's kind of just this weird, I guess what I'm getting at is like, we kind of live in a shitty moment. Because I think I'd like the moment to be very clear that you can have a business and you can have your thoughts and they are fine. It's fine that if Fernando's offering a great service, but in his social life, he has some thought, not in his social life, he also has some thoughts that maybe I don't agree with. I want a world where that's totally fine. Fernando delivers great service. Marko delivers great service. I will accept that service because he's the best service. That's like capitalism. I will go to the company that does the service the best in the most productive fashion for the best price. But now we live in a world, I feel like, that is just the economic signal is being distorted because there's this other layer that's being thrown in the economy. It's like, well, I don't really want to do business with those guys because I'm judging them to be this way.
So it's argumentative, Marko, but I would like the ability to say, no, I'm not doing business with that company because I don't like what they're doing.
No, well, that's the same, but we're saying...
Right, so I'm saying I don't want to be that company where anybody knows anything about me and decides, you don't want to, I don't want to become that person.
Yeah, but that's your free choice to be that way. What I'm saying is I feel like we're all slightly walking around on eggshells.
No, we certainly are. I mean...
And I don't like...
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think it's starting to change, though. I think it's finally starting to change.
Like, even in the U.S., I remember Tip O'Neill, he was the Speaker of the House back 40, 50 years ago. He would say that they would argue with, he was a Democrat, they would argue with Republicans all day in the House, but then they would all go out and have a beer later.
Yeah.
And I notice it even myself with some of my, I have a lot of American friends that are more, right-wing, extreme right-wing, and what before used to be, it's just your opinion, but it doesn't affect our friendship. Now, unfortunately, these political stances, as you're talking about, whether they're political, social stances, it becomes now I don't like you as a person. You're my enemy, right? Before it was just your opinion. We could disagree on political stances and still be friends. Today, it's become, if you don't agree with where I stand on these things, political, social, religious, environmental, everything, then you are now my enemy. In the same way that, that you see enemies that go to war together. And I mean, the recent movie this summer, the U.S. Civil War movie, does it seem so far-fetched that the U.S. could actually have a civil war?
Not as much as it did a few years ago, right? That's for sure.
So, I don't know. I mean, that
was a weird movie because the whole premise was them. Oh, yeah.
But it looks interesting.
Well, the whole...
boring. I didn't even make it to the end.
Yeah, it wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be. The whole idea was getting to the White House and taking out the president. I'm like, wow, they made a movie like that was the whole goal, to get to the White House and take out the president.
Right.
Like just the social...
Well, it's funny. I'm reading a book right now, and it's called the 12-Day... John Wilkes Booth, who shot President Lincoln, he went on a 12-day escape, and it took them 12 days to hunt him down. It's an amazing book about how he got away, who helped him, and that. And we always knew that was a terrible time in the U.S., but it's really remarkable to see how the U.S. was really split in half, and that's the way it is today. And it's not far off.
I guess I can't figure out just where, I guess... In the 2010s, it seemed easy to me in 2010, 2011, 2012 to look at the world. And I guess maybe I was just a bit younger And it seemed obvious to me, interest rates are going to stay low for a pretty long time. Hard assets will likely go up in value. Pretty straightforward. Make your bets and you can get along with the world. Whereas today, I feel like with geopolitics, the financial system situation, social things that are going on, I don't really know kind of how to navigate. And I guess I'm a bit of a control freak. So I feel a little unstable,
right?
And I don't really like it. Whereas before, even though there was things, I didn't control interest rates, but I still felt like I could get enough information or convince myself that I could have an advantage to make my bet properly.
Yes.
And now mix in things like AI and what they're going to do to jobs over the next 5 or 6 years.
Right.
And it's like, I don't know where we're going to be. And I think that's unsettling me, maybe unconsciously a little bit. So all of these irritants on social media and everything, they just amplify.
Well, that's the thing.
That.
Like, every election, I grew up kind of I have a poli-sci major. I was always a politics kid growing up. And I don't remember one election that wasn't the biggest election of our lives.
Yeah, you're right.
Right? So we're always trending in that direction.
You're right.
And with what Tom was saying, in 2010, I felt like I was a little more, relaxed. I wasn't, what's changed?
Were we just younger?
Social media.
So,
it's terrible. It's how many times a day do you sit down and just go on Twitter for 30 seconds, 5 minutes? Right. Whereas you never did that, but it wasn't possible. Guys, it's information being piled into your brain 24 hours a day. Like if I look at our chat, I think I'm on like 4 different chats with Tom.
Okay.
And different chats for different subjects for different people.
We've classified different people. We're allowed to discuss these subjects on this chat.
Like
I'm going
to do a thesis on why Tom sends this tweet to this chat and not that chat.
It's funny you're bringing that up right now because I do that purposely sometimes, waiting, almost baiting him.
Right.
To go, interesting that you sent it to this chat. And I don't think you ever have, but I consciously do that.
I've got notes.
Well, maybe if you start a 5th chat, for those of you listening, I'm not on any of these 4. So it really shows.
Well, you're kind of, but you're in a text message chat. We've got to get into
on one of the chats. And we use a very secure platform. We don't want anyone seeing these.
Sure. Okay.
But we should actually have, it just can't be over text. It's got to be on Signal.
Yeah.
I don't trust WhatsApp with a lot of things I say. So
I think at one point I deleted WhatsApp.
I did too. And my wife made me go back on it.
I had to go back on it. We were traveling on vacation. Every time you would rent something, everyone uses WhatsApp. So when you're traveling, no, you haven't experienced.
Yeah. 100%.
It's like everyone's like, here's the WhatsApp phone number, especially when you're out of Canada. Everybody's using WhatsApp. So I couldn't communicate with the outside world without WhatsApp.
Yeah.
So anyway, now I'm just very careful. Talking about, I want to ask you guys about AI stuff, but I'm curious because I respect both your guys thinking. This is some of the latest economic information coming out of Canada. Corporate bankruptcies, take this with a grain of salt, but for those of you listening, you can't see the chart. They're spiking straight up in Canada. When you guys see Canadian bankruptcies of companies and you see data like that, where do you think the Canadian economy is at? What is that a sign of? Is that a sign of the pandemic flushed a lot of new money into the economy? So companies that didn't go to business when they should have, maybe are we just catching up on the bankruptcies? Or do you think the economic situation right now is as fragile as this chart seems to show? And again, for those of you listening, it's bankruptcies basically going straight up on a chart in Canada.
My worry of charts like this is that it could be a little bit misleading because I'd like to know what the absolute numbers are, because I find sometimes on a relative basis, it's up 35%, and then you dig a little bit deeper and it's like 12 companies.
It was that went super low,
right?
Yeah.
So I would just have to know a little bit more. You're right; it does look alarming, and I mean it's undeniable and it's obvious that rising interest rates are going to have an effect on businesses. That's obvious. Combine rising interest rates with slowing GDP and these businesses who rely on consumers that now have less money because their mortgage payments have gone up. I mean, of course you're going to have rising bankruptcies, but if bankruptcies were historically very, 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 very low and now they're spiking, again, if on an absolute basis, it may not be alarming. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like mortgage arrears in Canada. Mortgage arrears in Canada are like 0.18 or whatever it is right now.
Right. And so if it goes to 0.36, it's 100% growth.
And the headline on the Financial Post or Globe and Mail would be accurate in saying that mortgage arrears have doubled.
Right.
But you're still well under the UK and you're well under the US. I think US is like at 1.7 right now. They hit like 6, 7, 8 or whatever is in the financial crisis.
So if you show the chart, it'll be straight up like that.
Yeah. I do know in the real estate community, and maybe we're more in tune to that than you guys, anyone touching real estate right now, mortgage brokers, contractors, definitely medium-sized to small developers, somebody who's bought 10 lots or 40 lots looking to develop, hurting really badly.
Hurting because the consumers are gone?
Hurting
the buyers
are gone and they can't forecast. So when we talk to some developers, they don't know how to come out with a new project because they don't know where interest rates are going to be in a year. So if the project, if they've got the land rezoned, they have to carry it for a year already. Now they're going to build, so they want to do the pre-sale. Well, what price do they sell it at? They're not going to incur all their labor costs and material costs right now, because let's say when they get to the framing or the roofing in a year, how much does all that material cost? So how do you price it today? Are interest rates going to, they dipping a little bit and about to spike up? Is inflation really cooling? Or, where are we at? So there's no buyers and they genuinely don't know how to price things. So how do you come to market? So that's kind of tough. And if you look at condo numbers in Toronto right now, the headlines on Toronto condos is going to be horrible for the next few years because the amount of completions are going to go to like 60,000 units a year, peaking out around 2027, 2026, 2027.
Is that higher or lower than usual?
That's higher. And actually, I'll show you that chart just so you have the context. And then what happens is in 2028, they basically come straight down because no one's building right now.
Right.
So we're going to go through a period. We're always going to go through this headline where you can see, and in 2025, it looks like they hit 40,000 completions. So this year they're going to be 25, then they're going to hit 40. Then in 2026, they're going to be 30,000 completions. And then 2027, they drop. And then 2028 is 5,000. So we're about to go through this period of the next few years where condos are going to be shit on. I can't believe you bought a new condo. What were you thinking? And then 2028 will hit and there'll be no new supply and things will probably kind of change in the condo market. So you're right. I think it's just perspective. But what that is, the reason we have the peak like that and the fall like that is when you centrally plan an economy based on interest rates the way we do, and you jam in population without proper planning, you just get these wild swings.
Yes, you do.
So
but I think you've always had wild swings. I mean, I often look back on the COVID years as, we can reflect on that and say, did governments do the right thing by stepping in and helping people out? Probably, to help people, pay them while they're, at home. But the reality was they interfered in an otherwise normal process where, economies go through booms and then busts. And then things are cleared out and then it starts again. We've done this since the beginning of time where, like you see in real estate, people, when the economy is down, you can buy bargain properties, but no one wants to buy. So developers are reluctant to build. And then when the economy starts heating up, they start building and then the prices go through the roof. And then the problem is they oversupply it and then they're sitting there and then prices have to fall down. Or I shouldn't say have to, but that's the way economies have always gone. You look at sort of the 7-year cycle of like boom and bust and then, reaccelerating and prosperity again. And COVID was the only time where government stepped in and said, yes, we can watch people lose their jobs and potentially lose their houses and everything declines, but eventually you climb out of it again. New businesses start up again and then, we go through it. 2008 in the US, they did that, right? The credit crisis damaged everything. Governments didn't step in and save the consumer. Government stepped in and saved businesses. Back in 2008. Banks and car companies, right?
A lot of banks.
This time around, governments tried a different tack. They said, instead of saving, the too big to fail banks, let's just save the consumer.
Yeah.
And I don't know what's right, but I do know that.
Oh, none of it's right.
None of it.
I think we've lost the idea that businesses and people need to sometimes suffer.
Exactly.
I just feel like we've entered a state of economics where nobody can suffer.
Isn't it the same way parenting is right now?
Yeah.
Parenting's the exact same way. And let's never forget, governments, we call them governments as though they're this like entity. They're people, right? If you're a prime minister or a president, in the old days, presidents would say, what's good for the country, even if it hurts everyone? A perfect example is war bonds. They would ask people that didn't go to war, invest in war bonds so we can fund the war. They would say...
I'm so happy you're bringing this up.
They would say, stop consuming water because we need to save money for the war efforts. And people did that. I mean, in the old days, I remember, you drive and people would flash your lights to say there's a cop up there so that you would warn your fellow citizen.
Yeah, we need to bring that back. We need to bring that back.
People are pretty selfish. And so even parenting has become, well, I can't discipline my child because then it hurts me. Because then now my kid is always around. We were going to go on vacation. Now I've punished them and now we're not going. Parenting is always, let's protect the child. Let's give them, trophies for participation. To me, governments getting involved and then paying people to stay home during COVID was participation trophies. They're like, I can't tell them that they're failing. I can't tell them that they're out of a job. So let us pay them. That way we'll get reelected. And that's where governments have changed. Now they care about re-election campaigns. And so it's not what's good for the country long term, it's what's good now. And so that's what we're seeing here. I think we're seeing kind of the fallback or the...
So if there was another financial crisis, then you would be against QE and feeding the system to save it?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know.
The answer to me is very clear. I'm against it.
You're against it.
Well, let's clean it out. Like, it's for the health of the system.
Right.
It's like you prop up companies that aren't profitable and can't survive and didn't save and made... Capitalism is about forming capital.
You're right.
Taking risk. If you make a good bet, you get a reward. If you made a bad bet, you are supposed to lose.
Right.
That is capitalism. What we've basically told the economy is that, hey, all you banks, take all the bets you want, fund all the mortgages you want, all the businesses you want, and oops, if you made a bad bet, we're going to save you. The economic signal from that is so distorted that it then kind of trickles down to all of society. Everybody becomes the speculator because we're all expecting to be saved. So I think you just send this message across the system that is like, we are going to save you no matter what, and it trickles through everything. So I want it... This sounds so horrible. I want it to fail the next time. Like, if there's a financial crisis and people will hear that and say, oh, you want everything to burn down? It's like, I don't really want that, but I think we need to go through that process. Otherwise, where does this process take us?
Would you agree that in the past, the bastion of that economic model, that capitalism first, was the US? Right?
Yeah.
But even they, maybe they're the worst of it, right? They're the ones that are saving the companies and, spent all this money giving away COVID payments. And so if they are no longer adopting the 100% capitalism model.
You're right.
I don't know where this all goes, because I think the one thing you're seeing now, whether it's, it doesn't matter which country, which government gets elected, the answer is always more government. And I think that is, my dad tells me sometimes about Croatia. Croatia's a small little country. This podcast hears a lot about Croatia because of Tom, but my dad will tell me it's a population of about 3.5 million people. They have more mayors in Croatia than we have in Canada.
Wow.
Right? So you look at every mayor, how many staff does that person have? How many city councilors? How many, things like, and how is if you just, I don't have any type of degree in finance or economics or anything like that. But to me, it's pretty simple. If you, and I might be wrong, and don't anybody who works for the government now come yelling and screaming at me, but if you work for the government, the people who are working in the private sector are paying for your salary, correct? But are they not?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
I don't think it's bad. I just think that has to be limited. Like, how can you, what is the right number? Because I'm not an anarcho-capitalist who believes there should be no government.
You're not saying nurses and teachers and all these people. I feel like we need to pay for these salaries, but how much of bureaucracy?
Right. Like, I think I saw something somewhere on social media, but saying something about...
What did it say in the comments?
Yeah, I don't know, a lot. But it was saying something along the lines of, this specific country has doubled their spend in government in 8 years. And the question was, is anybody's life better? And the answer was unequivocally no. So if you now redouble that amount of spending on government, I think it had something to do with Argentina, right? Because of everything that Miele guy's trying to do, right? And it's going to get pretty intense over there, right? It is a country that has got, I think, 60 or 70% of people are being paid by the government.
Oh, wow.
Right? If he's going to pare that back, there's going to be a lot of pain, right? But what's the answer? That country was headed in the wrong direction. Now, did they need to make a small change, or did they need to make a drastic change? But I think almost all Western countries, and not even Western, because, China, there's a lot of big economies that are not just in the West. Government is just gigantic. And how do you have an economy that is so based on, you're always sending me jobs numbers, right? Oh, jobs numbers are up this much. We know that there's, a lot of opaqueness to those numbers. But if a significant amount of job growth is in the public sector, is that real job growth? Because Tom tomorrow can't say, if Tom right now is running at zero, like no profit, no loss, and he says, tomorrow we're doubling the size of the staff. Well, within 2 months, the company will be bankrupt unless those people add tremendous productivity. But if you're government, you can just double the size of workers as often as you want. And I just press a printing button and they get paid. So I just wonder if we're doing too much in that side. And like you said, I'm not against teachers, proper workers, but like if we've doubled the size of government workers in the past 10 years in Canada, or 20, whatever it is, what got sucked into that? Which, I think government has a place, but I believe the private sector delivers things more efficiently, right? So as a taxpayer, I don't want to find out that there is something that used to be provided by the public sector and it is now today being provided by the public sector. I would have trouble understanding why we would be doing that as a society.
To me, if you drill down deeper, that was a great comparison of Tom's business versus the government. Let's drill down. Why would Tom not spend double the payroll, but the government does? Why? What is the distinct difference between?
There's no fiscal inhibition because you don't have to balance a budget. You don't have to have the income in the government. Right. You don't have to have the income to support your expenses. Not even the taxing.
Right. And let's simplify that even more. How about just using this phrase? It's not their money.
Right.
Versus this is your money. And I've said this even, and I'm not, criticizing just governments. I criticize even public companies, right? Where the CEOs of these public companies, it's not their money. So is it any surprise when they decide to put the company's name on an arena and spend hundreds of millions of dollars for the naming rights? Because it's not their money.
Some company pissed you off.
No, it's not. I look at, for example,
Fernando invested in some company that they spent a lot of money.
No, but remember the Air Canada Center? Was that what it was? What was
Air Canada, ACC?
ACC, right? But now it's not, right?
Yeah.
Now it's
Scotiabank.
But people still call it ACC, right? Did you see? And I don't mean to, segue into this, but it's along the same lines. Air Canada paid $20 million for the naming rights for the first 20 years that ACC was open. I think it was 20 years.
Yeah.
When Scotiabank bought the naming rights, it cost them $400 million for the next 20 years.
No way.
Look it up. So my question is, do we really, if it was your business, you would actually spend some time and say, if I spend $400 million for the naming rights of this place, I better at least get $400 million back in profits, revenues, brand recognition.
I should be able to track it somehow. What's the return?
Right. But I doubt that they're going to generate $400 million.
But if you look at both of those businesses that you mentioned,
right,
if either of those companies gets into real hot water, someone's coming to save those two companies.
Right.
Air Canada.
Right. You're not going to, we can't just now not have a national airline. We can't let Bank of Nova Scotia disappear. So they can spend the money a little more freely.
I think that's what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying. It's not their money.
And this is why I always discuss on this podcast, and Fernando, you've probably heard me say it, Marko's sick of hearing me say it for sure, is that when you have a central banking system that basically supports the government at any cost, and sometimes in the US people will say, well, the Federal Reserve doesn't support the government really. It's when they sell debt, it goes through primary dealers. The Federal Reserve doesn't really print money to make the economy work.
Well, it's funny because you just started to interrupt you, but it streamed right there because when you're talking about the war bonds, I recently saw a podcast or listened to a podcast or saw a YouTube video about World War I and how England, the people were not buying the war bonds. So the central bank bought all the war bonds and lied and said the people bought them.
Wow.
So that was an interesting
They lied about it.
That was an interesting story about the war that shouldn't have been.
And it just came out like 10 years ago. This was hidden and it was some kind of information.
I'm not sure where.
It only came to light like 10 years ago where the Bank of England, maybe 15, Bank of England admitted they did this in like 2010.
But you know what, guys? I go back to it. It's not their money.
Right. Yeah.
But so then we're coming to the problem that I'm always talking about is that it's the central banking system. This, to me, Fernando, is the key problem. Because if the government had to go to the people all the time and say, hey, I'm going to tax you because we have to pay these things, and I'm going to tax you for hospitals and teachers and these things, then I can vote based on that. But when they can just say anything, so I will give you everything, and they don't have to run a balanced budget, and the Central Bank of Canada will just print some new money up in a convoluted fashion so they can say, well, we're not really printing the money, but they print up the money so the government can do it. Don't we just have to remove the central banks so that we can then have a much more honest government?
You've probably had this conversation how many times on this podcast?
8 million.
Right. So what is the counter argument to that? Like, I can't, like, is there anything good that the central bank does?
If you and I conquered a piece of the globe, and us three conquered a part of the world, and we put up borders, and then we started our own government in that world, and we had a treasury for that government because we were going to have some taxes to pay for some hospitals and stuff, and we came up with the currency of that land. Would we then, as the conquerors of that corner of the world, then say, whoa, the treasury isn't going to manage the money itself directly. We're going to get this other system called a central banker in here, and we're going to give them objective, neutral authority on giving us money and not giving us money. Why, as a sovereign nation that we conquered, would we outsource the treasury functions to a central bank? I would never do that. I don't think you guys would do that.
You've done way more reading on this than I.
Why would we do that? It doesn't make any sense.
What's the alternative?
You don't need one. You save money. So, like, if you
need more money, you tax. You go to your public.
Have war bonds. You go.
Sorry, just asking you. Can you not think of? And I'm asking this devil's out.
I got it.
Of a single thing why it was good.
The only argument that can make any sense to me that I disagree with is that governments spend money too frivolously. And by having this neutral central bank, we can kind of control interest rates, not to the benefit of the government. We will do it for what the economy really needs.
So, this is simpleton talking. So I think we talked about this actually in one of our previous podcasts where you said it was good to have an impartial group that, like, it couldn't just be, vote for me, I'm going to lower interest rates to 1%. So you don't want that to be an election, issue.
Yeah.
But, who should be then dictating that stuff? Like, do you want Trudeau to say, be in charge of interest rates? Or should interest rates be something that is privatized and banks do whatever? Like, there shouldn't even be.
It's just a private thing between banking on the risk that they're taking. And when you have a finite set of currency in the country, it balances out. Because if I made a lot of bad bets and I lose money as a bank, oh my gosh, then I can't go fund all this real estate speculation over here with low interest rates because I'm out of money. Like, I lost the money. Whereas in today's world, the bank makes all these bad bets over here. Interest rates are really low, because they're like, oh my gosh, we got to save the economy. There was a bunch of bad bets made. And the bank is then saved by the central bank. And then it says, okay, we'll lend out some money over here to these real estate speculators because we need to get, like, the money flowing again. And it just breeds this misinformation in the economy, and nobody has control of anything. It's like a throw up the money in the air and everybody grab what you can grab. Whereas I just want an honest system where the interest rate's set by the risk.
Right. I'd like to hear what Fernando's.
Yeah, my only word.
Is that your way of saying to shut up?
Yeah, no. My only
Everybody's
word
heard enough of
is that the absence of, as I've said before, sort of an independent, ideally independent. I don't know if they are, but let's say independent group that is not moved by re-election campaigns, moved by popularity decisions. An example was in Turkey. I think it was Turkey with Erdogan. He dictated interest rates. And while the rest of the world was raising interest rates after COVID, when there was a spike in inflation, UK over 10%, here 8 and 9%, he did something completely different, said, I don't care. We're lowering interest rates, thinking this will be great because we're going to be prospering with low interest rates while the rest of the world, is raising interest rates. Well, it completely backfired. It plunged the Turkish lira into zero. Inflation went to like 30, 40, 50% a day. It was going up. So there was an example where there wasn't a central bank. He thought, I'm doing this for my people to get us richer, with no really education on monetary fiscal issues. And he did what sounded like it made a lot of sense. I mean, let's be honest.
Well, your example is still central control, Fernando.
Right.
Your example is he just became the central bank. What I'm saying is
we want 3 of us would conquer a corner of the world. So there is central control between the 3 of us.
But I'm saying to give interest rate or rate control to the private sector, the banks, to analyze individually on the risk and set the price of money based on the risk that they're taking, not to have the prime minister or us as the conquerors of that land
but the
universally centrally setting it.
But
it doesn't
the bank
work.
may not care about inflation. So
you can only inflate if you can print money, Fernando. If there's only a set amount of currency in this nation that we create,
that's what you're saying.
Yeah, you can't inflate the currency.
But you
so
say
set the rate.
But the euro doesn't. They don't print dollars. The
euro prints lots of dollars.
So who?
It's called the euro dollar market. The euro dollar market is arguably larger than the U.S. trackable dollar market.
But I thought the difference between euro, because there's 17 countries in the euro, that they can't just willy-nilly just print dollars like the U.S. can.
Sorry, there's a difference between euros and euro dollars?
Correct. The euro dollar market is the American dollar market outside of America.
I think Fernando's talking about euros.
And the actual euros.
Yeah, the euro. So, they do print the euro in the euro.
I don't know enough about it to know how they go about printing that, because they would have to get collaboration from everybody.
Well, this is the argument.
The European Central Bank, though.
This is the argument in Europe, is that why did we, as an independent nation of Italy, of France, give up control of the creation of the currency to the European Central Bank, to a bunch of unelected bureaucrats?
Well, it shouldn't be France.
So they do print money.
Yeah. So it shouldn't be France and Italy that's complaining. It should be Germany who's
sure. Okay, Germany. So they print money there.
Yeah.
It's just this system that I think because we don't talk about it, Fernando, we don't talk about it. Nobody really knows, even on Bay Street. I'm sure you could pull out of 100 people on Bay Street, pull 99 people aside, and none of them are really going to know how the central banking system works. Maybe one person does it of every 100. And I think it just creates this environment where we just all accept it.
There's no doubt that it does, like on its surface, it could appear like a Ponzi scheme where you just print up money to pay past investors.
And that's the thing. It's technically, you're going to, now it's going to sound like I'm really crazy, but it is a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah.
It is. This money, the money, when you and I sign a piece of paper creating a new mortgage or a credit line, in that moment, you are creating money. So when you go to buy a house, if you take a mortgage on that house, and let's say you take the mortgage and that money is then paying to do whatever you want with that money. When you sign the paper, the bank didn't have that money in a vault somewhere.
Oh, you're right.
When you make a credit line, when you swipe your credit card or you tap your credit card on the way home today at the gas station, for example, Visa or MasterCard or Amex didn't have that money. That money was newly created in that instant. All of the money that exists today comes out of nothing, and it comes out of whenever we create debt. So it's a complete Ponzi. And the reason for the reason this is so interesting to me is that it didn't start that way. The Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, if you go to one of those stamp stores that has a bunch of like old stamps and currencies, you'll see like Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, this note is redeemable for $5 worth of silver or whatever it is. And then the central banking system kind of weaved its way into America, and then it weaved its way into Canada, and the Bank of Canada kind of reversed into this a little bit and took over the currency of the country. But if we think about this, every dollar that comes into existence plus interest. We are a debt-based currency. So every dollar that's created, every single dollar comes into an existence plus interest. Well, if we reverse it all the way back to the first dollar, and the first dollar is created, it's owed back to the Bank of Canada plus interest. Where do you get the 10 cents? Let's say it's 10% interest. Where do you get the 10 cents in that example to pay back the $1.10 that's owed on the first dollar that came into existence? You can't. What do you have to do? Print money, borrow again. But it's not just printing, you're borrowing. And that's why when I talk about the US debt and the Canadian debt, I'm like, this is just a Ponzi, because unfortunately the debt just always must grow.
And you know my position on that. And that was, even if I agree with you, right? The point is how egocentric that you think it's all going to blow up during your lifetime, right? And that's in the end.
But that's fine. But that's fine, and it might not. I agree with you, because they can keep it going a long time. And I'm willing to think that I have an ego thinking that it may blow up in my time. But it doesn't change the factual accurateness of that statement that it's a complete Ponzi.
Maybe.
Because what would be the definition of it not being a Ponzi? That every dollar is backed by something?
But as long as there's faith.
Okay. So this is just a Ponzi. So it's just
religions are based on
but
faith.
that's taking me to where I want to go. That it's just a confidence game.
And what I'm saying to you is that even if you're right, and I'll grant you that you may be right, but the idea that it's going to end. It just so happens that this incredible decades long, centuries long Ponzi scheme is going to crumble during Tom Karaz's lifetime. Because that's fair. That's the way movies happen, right? Where all the drama happens.
The market can stay irrational longer than I can stay solvent.
Forget solvent. Longer than you could stay alive. Right?
That's fair.
And that's all I'm saying is that you could rail against
I'm getting my Braveheart sweater with freedom written all over it.
You can rail against it and move off the grid and live on, buy an island in the Southern Pacific and say, you people are all going to come to my shores when it all crumbles.
You're speaking my language now.
And I'm telling you.
It's, I have ADD or something like that. But what I find interesting is somebody once said that all the Doomsday Preppers live in North America. There are none in Europe. Mm-hmm. Europeans have lived through wars.
So much.
They've lived through it all. Right? And it's interesting that the Americans really haven't lived through very much war on their own territory, right? Why are they more obsessed and thinking this is going to collapse in my lifetime when they haven't really experienced it? I'm not making a point.
I think that's just normal. Like when I talk to relatives and friends in Croatia that have lived through the hyperinflation of the 90s, it's just a thing that happens to them, and it's actually in their historical memory of their current lifetime. It's not like a big deal. Whereas here, because like you're saying, we don't have that context, I think North Americans make it a big deal. And that's why I think sometimes when I talk about this, people will think I'm negative, and it's less I'm being negative. It's more I'm just being like, can't you see it's a Ponzi? It's just a Ponzi.
Yeah,
and it's fine. And I agree, Fernando, with your point that like this could go on for a long time, but it's difficult for me not to say that like all of the government's problems at this point, to me, are the fact that the government doesn't have to be fiscally responsible.
Yes.
And if we could just make the government fiscally responsible,
we could be in this system and make it last a lot longer if we were just a bit more rational about it.
Yeah, and right? I'm just worried that the confidence, like I have a chart here up of US government spending is equal to 44% of the economy right now. And you can see it just kind of like goes up and up and up, and it starts to creep up at the start of the creation of the central bank. Mm-hmm. And there have been moments in U.S. history that they've had central banks, early 1800s, got rid of them, then they brought them back. We've now had a central banking system for quite a long time.
When did the chart goes back to 17? Yeah, I was going to ask you.
They had central banks and got rid of them?
Yeah.
Oh, so I'd love to know. So what happened in between?
In the early 1800s, the president, whose name escapes me, there's this great book called The Creature from Jekyll Island that just maps
I have to read it.
It's a long read, but to me, it's like a fiction. It reads like fiction.
So when did central banks reappear?
1913 in the U.S. Right. They kind of came in on Christmas Eve. They snuck it through.
So it's been 110 years now. Of it being in existence.
Well, and then really people will argue about that, just Fernando, not you, but just because for a certain period of time till 1970 when Nixon temporarily took us off the gold.
Yeah, the gold standard. How does that relate to the gold standard then?
Well, because at one point, in 1944, after World War II, the world looks around and says, oh my gosh, the U.S. has accumulated a lot of the world's gold because everybody was paying the U.S. for factories to build all these weapons and stuff. And the U.S. then said, hey, why don't we'll be the base of the currency, of the global currency system going forward. And every dollar, it can be exchanged for this many ounces of gold. And they kept that system going. But what happened is the U.S. then started printing more and more money. And France called America's bluff. And in the late 1960s, France said, wait a second, it's feeling to me like you guys are printing a lot more money than you actually have as that exchange ratio for gold. Right. I think these dollars are inflating and they're becoming worth less and less. You know what? Give us our gold back. We don't want to store it at Fort Knox or the New York Fed anymore. Send that back to us. And they sent the gold back. U.S. was starting to have gold come down in its vaults. And Nixon came out and said, whoa, okay, you know what?
No more gold.
We're getting off this gold. It'll be temporary. And since 1971 has, I guess what some people would say is really when the central banking system went completely off a gold backing. And we've been like that for 50 years.
All I'll ask is this. I pray for all of us that we're doing these things 20 years from now, 30 years from now, God willing, or, healthcare willing. How will you continue this? Like, I'm just curious. Like,
the reason I'll continue it is because to me, it doesn't.
That's a yes.
Oh yeah, 100%.
So
the reason I will continue it is that a lot of society's problems right now are coming from a government that is spending out of control. And I just want the government to spend within its fiscal means and go to taxpayers and said, you know what, we're going to fund this war over here in this country outside of our borders. And that's what we stand for. And to be able to fund it, you have to vote for me, because I'm going to raise taxes to this point in order to fund it. But to fund a war in some other place of the world right now, actually, I don't need to ask you anything. I'm just going to go and send the money. And when we're out of money, I'm going to get the central bank to print me some more money. So to me, and you can reverse that to a whole bunch of different issues, that amount of that ability is not democracy, because now we're putting people in power and then they're able to do all these weird and wonderful things that I never voted for. I didn't vote for that at all. Like, I'm not voting to send money. If we have so much money in this country that we can start sending it all over the world for all different wonderful reasons, well, can't we just like get the MRI that Orangeville is asking for, the MRI machine that Orangeville is asking for someone? Can we not pay for the MRI machine up there? So the nurses, can we get a few more surgeries available in Canada, a little bit more surgeons? Can we pay some of the nurses and doctors a bit more? Can we get teachers maybe a little bit more help? Can we put more money into the school system and make it better? Can we get better technology in there? Why are we sending all this money around the world? I don't have to vote for that. The government can do it without my consent.
But if so when I'm money at infinitum, why wouldn't they just print more and do all those other things too?
Exactly.
So fund the war and the medical technology and the schools and everything you've just asked for. I guess what I'm saying is, I think it's a pretty good bet that they're not going to become more restrictive governments. They're going to continue to spend money as much as they want. I don't think, and running on a platform that you're saying, the problem is
I
increasing national debt is so abstract, as I've talked to you before. It doesn't affect people day to day.
Well, it does. They just don't know it. Like the reason the steak is more expensive at the butcher is because we've debased the currency for the debt. Like that is a direct effect. They just don't make the connection.
Right. And it's hard to run on those platforms because it's easier to run on the platform of, I'm going to keep giving you all the money you want and spend money on wars and do all that. And so I'm curious to see if we're still at this in 30 years, if you'll still be railing against government spending. And the good news is this. What I do appreciate about you, though, is that you're still investing and you're still making a lot of money and all these other things. I find sometimes people, these preppers, they're sacrificing a lot of prosperity because they're still waiting for this doomsday.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
You know, whether it's investing in the markets, they're like, oh, I'm not in the market because it's going to blow up. Or how many times have you heard stories of people that haven't bought a home because prices are going to collapse?
Oh, gosh.
And meanwhile, 20 years later.
We have a good friend who in 1998 pulled me aside. You know who he is. His first letter starts with an R, if he's ever listening to this. And he pulled me aside in 1998 and said, hey, Tom, prices are about to fall.
Right.
Real estate's gone up for 2 years in a row.
Right.
So it's going to fall. So yeah.
And I worry about those people, is that they're the ones sitting.
So you're not worried about me, Fernando?
I'm not worried about you because you're very wealthy. And
I'm very wealthy.
You're fine.
Wow. Okay.
But if you were sitting on the sidelines, if you were
a strong hairline.
Yeah. If you were sitting on the sidelines, sitting on all this cash, waiting for this doomsday scenario, then I would say.
And I think that's the biggest misconception when I talk to some people. I just want to know the rules of the game. So if I understand the rules of the game, and I think now I have a pretty good understanding of the rules of the game, how money works and stuff, I'm fine. I'll go and play with these rules, and I'll disagree with how the rules are, but I can go play in the world because I understand the rule. Like I know why steak is going to get more expensive 5 years from now. Like definitively, I understand that steak will be more expensive 5 years from now. And then I understand the rules, and I'm a control freak.
I'll tell one quick story. I'm on Twitter, as I said, and I don't ever tweet. Is that what it's called? Whatever it is.
Fernando, come on. We know you have an anonymous account.
I don't ever tweet.
Against the, you're probably tweeting. You're going to go home and tweet on some of the stuff I
don't even know. If he's not, he's going to do it now.
I don't even know how to create a tweet, but I do know how to respond. So occasionally I'll reply to someone. And there's a guy I follow in the markets who's like, he's convinced the market is corrupt. It's all fixed by the government. And he was railing every day about how the market opens down and then always recovers, right? By, every single day this happens. So I just wrote to him and I said, if it happens every day, why don't you just buy in the morning and then sell in the afternoon? And he wrote back, good point. And that's all he got. And that's all he said. But he did respond to me. So I guess what I'm saying is that even Doomsday, if they just sit down and say, if that were true, why don't you act on it?
Mm-hmm. And I think the way I've been acting on it has been real estate. Like since 2008, I didn't understand some of these concepts to the point I understand them now. But after the great financial crisis, I started to.
Yes.
And then it made sense to me to just own hard assets.
Right.
And that was the way I was going to play it. I'm like, oh, I understand the way the system works, and I'm going to play it this way.
And it works. And it's working.
Marko, for you, when you hear these conversations for your children, do you think, let me throw this at you. Fernando, I'd like your take on this too. GDP is made up of, consumption, net exports, investment, government spend, all these kinds of things. Heavily influenced, the three factors that heavily influence GDP would be labor, productivity, and capital. Okay, those are the three factors that usually economists are going to agree. These are the major influences. Labor, over the last 50 years, has really kind of come down in its value. Unions have lost power. They continue to lose power. With AI now, I feel like we're not just going to lose, we're not going to lose like fringe things. We're going to lose entire call centers with one bot. So like 500 people in a call center, you can get one bot soon enough that'll answer the questions when you and I call a bank in Canada to answer questions better than 500 people can 24/7, 365. So labor to me is going to go down. Productivity is going to continue to increase. Labor down, productivity increase. The last variable there is capital. I don't know how to participate in the labor markets to ride the next trends of AI and jobs and that kind of stuff. I don't understand what's going to happen with labor. I'm confused, legitimately. Productivity, I don't know how to participate in because I'm not NVIDIA. I'm not making chips. I'm also not supplying energy. I'm not a power plant that supplies some of these things because that could be an interesting play. Capital, the last thing, I can kind of play in those markets because I can buy real estate, and real estate is very friendly in the capital markets to banks. Real estate is accepted as collateral. Banks will lend on it. And we didn't talk about Bitcoin this time. I think Bitcoin is the purest form of capital. There's no counterparty risk. I can custody it myself, that whole bit. So to me, I understand, if out of the three influences of GDP, labor, productivity, and capital, I'm going to play in the capital area because that's the area I feel like I can get into the most, and I'm going to play it with real estate and Bitcoin. When you hear me lay that out, and then you think about your kids' future, where do the kids go next? How are you, and Fernando, I'll open it up to you as well. Like when you hear me just say, like what comes to mind? Is it just like, Tom, what the fuck are you talking about?
Well, it's actually, I'd like to ask Fernando a question, and this almost goes back to what we were just talking about and folds this in. Are things worse today than they were before? I'm very worried about my children. I'm very worried about where they're going to be, what they should do with their lives, right? People are constantly talking about how are my kids going to be able to afford a home? How are my kids going to be able to afford life, right? So I have no idea what advice to give my children right now. What I'm trying to do more than anything is create well-rounded individuals. I don't want somebody who is, purely academic and doesn't have social skills. I don't want someone who doesn't know how to do math. I want kids that are
resilient, resourceful.
They can roll with the punches. If they got to be a salesperson, they could be a salesperson. If they got to carry a hammer, they can carry a hammer. If they got to cut hair, they can cut hair. That they're not going to be just, one way of doing things and you're betting it all. But what I'd like to know from Fernando, because your kids are a little bit older than ours, was, did you have this much anxiety about your children's future that so many people today are feeling about their children? Because the amount of people that I know, and I keep opening up like 10 different Pandora's box, but the amount of people that are saying, I'm leaving Canada because my kids cannot afford a house here. My kids can't afford to go to a restaurant. Were people having those conversations 15 years ago when your kids were entering the workforce, considering their future? Because this goes back to the how long are we going to
50-year-old kids? How old do you think Fernando is?
I don't know, but they're 10 years older. Like just like, your son, like what were you telling, like my kids are the youngest. What were you telling Aiden when he was 15? Right? Like, and sorry, I just want to roll this all into this subject of this Ponzi scheme. And is it getting worse? Are we getting closer to the end? Nobody knows until you get there. Could be another 50 years, could be tomorrow. Mm-hmm. But are things worse today? Or is it, no, we were having the same conversations 10 years ago.
Fernando, you're the most balanced.
I don't know if I'm the most balanced. I'm probably the worst parent of the three of us. I can promise you that. And
we're all going to have to vote. You know what? You think you're the worst. Well, let me tell you what I did.
I hit my son yesterday.
And the reason I say that is because, yes, 15 years ago, people were always concerned about, the future of their children. I've got to be honest with you. I've never worried because I think you are all underestimating the ability of generations to adapt. And so you're right. Are they going to live the same lives we did? Probably not. But I think the next generation can adapt to either, if they can't afford to own a home, they'll probably rent. If you look at Europe, Europe's a renting, continent. I mean, it's rare that people own homes. So they'll rent. Number two, our mentality was success means a big house. For them, success may be balance, which I think I've heard this word far too many times. Travel, experiences. So this idea of renting something small for simply the purposes of just living rather than our homes were a reflection of our success, our statement, our what neighborhood
keeping up with the Joneses.
Keeping up with the Joneses. What schools do your kids go to? So that may change. So I don't worry. I've never worried, not because there's concern, but because I just think they'll figure it out. We figured it out. I mean, we're all children of immigrants. So it's not like our parents gave us $100 million to get started, right? So, and we figured it out and we did okay. Like you said, Marko, I agree. With my kids, I worry more about what kind of humans are they? Are they good people? Are they, my kids were good students, not fantastically great students. My kids were good athletes, not fantastically great athletes. All I cared about was, are they good people? Are they going to care about other people? Are they going to care about the environment, animals? Like, I just want them to be good people. And the rest of it, they'll figure it out.
Takes care of itself.
So yeah, I don't think I'm a great...
no, I think that is great.
I don't think I'm a great mentor and says, study hard, keep working, you got to be successful.
I think what you described there is great.
Do you think your parents worried a lot about you? Because I know my parent, it might be like a cultural thing. My parents worried about me all the time. I have this thing, when I was younger, my dad, school. Yeah, and then my dad said, job. Then he said, married, then kids. And I said to him, I go, when is this going to stop? He goes, never. He goes, I don't have an education. The only thing I can do is yell at you and worry about you. And I think I have an education, but I got that a little bit ingrained from my father. And I worry about my kids. I don't act on it. I'm not, losing sleep about it. I'm not yelling at them, talking to them. But I feel like I spend more brain time thinking about that than I ever thought I was going to. Maybe it's just this is another thing of social media where people are talking about it. It's in your face a lot more. I think you do a really
good job, and I think you underestimate how good. Just watching you, and you're probably going to think, oh well, Tom, you don't see all the hours of the day. Just watching you, who you are as a person and as a father, I think you're probably really underestimating how great of a father you are, because you present a balanced view of the world. Like, you're one of the best people, and Fernando, you're very good at this as well, is that when I'll say something crazy, you'll say, well, Tom, have you ever thought about it this way? You won't attack me back. You will present another argument that makes me think like, oh my gosh, maybe I am a little bit like off on the way I'm thinking. And I think just your ability to do that must translate also to the way you're talking to your kids.
But I'm not even asking, am I a good father, right? I'm asking more like, is this social anxiety that, because I hear people talking about.
And I think, I guess where I was getting is I think it is social anxiety that's unnecessary, to Fernando's point, because I think anything that happens to our children, you build character out of tough times and out of figuring things out and out of a bit of struggle. And if we were to have a perfect economy with not some of this craziness that I'm talking about and stuff, it actually robs people out of building character. So I know as crazy that sounds, like I'm almost now saying everything is fine in the world the way it is, but I really think that you need challenges in life. And if the challenge is going to be jobs and figuring out what to do when they're grown up and work, I think that will build a certain character in them that will be the best thing that you wished for your kids. So I think we don't have to worry.
But I guess the word worry, I guess when you really think about it, if there was real worry, you would worry about their safety, right? Worrying that they're not going to get a great job or own a house. I think that we should have different variations of the word worry.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If you think about it, like we're saying worry, but I'll bet you if we spoke to our ancestors of like 300 years ago, they'd be like, no, we're worried that we're going to get scurvy and die. Right? That's not worry, what you're saying. What you're saying is you kind of hope that they get a house. You kind of hope they get a good job. And so I guess that's where I'm coming from, is that I try not to worry about things that, because let's be honest, that's a very North American first world worry. I've said this a million times. Why is it that, we have more depression and more people on medication in the richest countries in the world than in the poorest? Why is it that the highest suicide rates are in the richest countries, and in the poorest countries, there's very little suicide? Why is that? So maybe we've screwed this whole thing up to say, oh, we're measuring needs in a very distorted way. Houses are not needs. And so that's always, yesterday I was at dinner with my friend in AI, and he's a brilliant scientist, but he's very mystical and spiritual. And I was explaining this thing, and he said, have you ever heard the story of the man who said, I want to go and find the happiest man in the world, and I want to put his shirt on so I can feel what it feels like to be the happiest man in the world. He said, I found the happiest man, but he wasn't wearing a shirt. And I'm like, that's brilliant. That's it right there. Is that, so to your point.
I don't know what that is, Fernando, but it sounded profound.
Well, think about it. He's a poor
what I was
man
thinking
with no
this whole
shirt.
time?
Yeah.
I was thinking, I wish I could be Fernando.
Oh, yeah, right.
You have
a weird ability to think of things.
A clarity in the way that you think. You worry about the things that you should worry about, and other things you don't worry about. Maybe you don't practice what you preach, but what you're saying is awesome.
Yeah.
It really is.
You're putting on a great facade right now.
No, but that's why I said I'm not a good parent, because my father, to your point, was go to school, get a job, get married, don't get divorced. I got divorced. So it was all that. And I felt that pressure from him. And I'm like, afterwards I realized, but those were silly pressures. I mean, we're not threatened. Our lives aren't threatened, right?
Yeah, so I think you're hitting on the point that it's safety. If it came to the point, Marko, so as far as the jobs and stuff, do I worry about it? And do I think about it? I think if someone has resiliency and can be resourceful and they're a good person, to your point, they're going to make it.
Yeah.
But if their safety is threatened,
that's where I
get me out of the area.
Right.
Then I'm in charge of the family and let's go.
Guys, every night before I go to bed, I pray that my kids are safe. Right? When my daughter's out at a club, I'm like, please get her home safe. Right. I don't care about please have her a good career or, make sure she gets straight A's in school. I don't care about that. Get them home safe.
Guys, thanks for doing this. We will have to do this again so that I can rail against central banking again, just so we can test your theory. I think it's going to be.
What's your rush? Where you got to go? Yeah. I got time.
Do you?
No,
Did you look at your Phantom watch right there? Yeah. Did we not cover something you wanted to cover?
Nothing. I could sit here for 6 hours and talk. I don't have to go.
You know what it is? I think it's getting hot in here. Are you getting hot in here?
Okay, yeah. Let's get out of here.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. You can find every new episode of the Your Life, Your Term show on all the major streaming platforms. So Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. And if you'd like to get free copies of some of the books that we've put together, like these right here, or some of the reports that we've put together, like these right here, you can find all of those at www.rockstarinnercircle.com. That's www.rockstarinnercircle.com. That's it for now. Until next time, your life, your terms.